I think probably up to about the age of 22, the story really is just about me as a guy trying to, just find my way in the world and go to school and, go off and travel and do the things that people want to do. And I think the fact that, there were many challenges along the way that made that a little bit more difficult for myself. I think the way I was able to overcome that was a self-belief, but it was probably instilled from my family. So I think my story around self-belief very much starts from the closest, nearest and dearest around me. And not going to lie about it, that's a big part of why I've been able to go on. I suppose later on, I'll be able to sort of show you how I maybe comprehended that I had this self-belief and then tried to channel it more concertedly. But to give you a little bit more of a background info, the disability I have is called spinal muscular atrophy. Has anyone heard of SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, at all? It's quite a rare disability, but it's similar to muscular dystrophy, which you may have heard of. But essentially it's genetic, so my mum and dad don't have SMA, but they had the genes that then I was born with SMA. And essentially there's a cell at the top of my spine which is damaged through the genetic process. And all of the messages that go from my brain to the muscles are kind of blocked or lessened. So if you kind of kicked me in the leg or the arm, I have full feeling it would bloody hurt and I'd run you over with my chair. But I'm not able to actually, sort of stand up, or even my upper body is weaker as well. So in terms of what that means now in my daily life, the wheelchair is how I get around. I've got a car which is all adapted, so there's 2 thumb buttons for accelerate and brake, and a sort of handlebar which enables the wheels to turn. It's pretty futuristic stuff, and I'll sort of touch upon that again a bit later as well. But there's a lot of technology that underpins me being able to be out here today and doing the things I do, and obviously personal support. So I have 24-hour, sort of 24/7 care, which means I need some help at night time to turn over. If that's what I need to do, I would call my carer. Help with the shower, help with cooking. So when you look at my physical ability, it's pretty minimal. And I think, as I say, growing up, it was about how can I go to school. If you think going to a school, you've got the issue of access. So if the building doesn't have ramps or there's steps there, then that's going to disable me from going to school. And even if you've got ramps and access, if the teachers are maybe assuming because you have a disability, because physically you're able to do very little, then that could also translate into your cognitive ability or ability to learn, which, in my case, and obviously there are disabilities out there where some people have a learning disability too, but for me, sort of education-wise, I was able, if enabled, with the right facilities to get on and do well. So I guess early on, I think mum and dad would have been the leaders on ensuring that I was going to the local school, and sort of been able to integrate in the village. And these were all things that I guess were sort of passing me by as a 5-year-old. I didn't have as much of an awareness that I was disabled. I didn't have as much of an awareness that people maybe would discriminate or judge. But because there was this front footing that I went to the local school, I mixed in a mainstream school with non-disabled people, I accessed the curriculum. In the long run, I was able to have a very normal, inverted commas, upbringing. So yeah, I suppose on the social side as well, there were barriers. So even if I was going to the local school and getting on with my class as well, there could have been something where, maybe I wouldn't be able to join in playing football, or I wouldn't be able to go to parties. And again, mum and dad was at the forefront of making sure that was possible. So I remember, with the Cubs, there's an individual back there who knows me. I went to Cubs and did all the Cub stuff, and there was a Cub football team, and I used to join in, and I would either be in goal and block the ball with my wheelchair, or I'd be a striker on the back post, and the ball would come across, and I'd sort of knock it in the goal with my wheelchair. So you get painting the picture really that across the board childhood, I was in some senses lucky that mum and dad made that happen, and that the village I grew up in were sort of enabling of that too. And it even fed into things like with a wheelchair. There are funding streams that can assist the cost of a wheelchair, such a fundamental thing for my life. But this chair costs about £7,000, and obviously you can't, you know, the funding won't cover it all. So we did a lot of fundraising. Do you remember that in the village as well?
I do.
And we had like local fetes and, you know, all sorts of sponsored bike rides. And in the end, I suppose my disability, rather than being something that can in society be cast aside and discriminated, it was almost embraced and became a part of the community, and everyone helped to make sure I had the right wheelchair and the right equipment. So, you know, that was definitely a good footing, and that was not anything that I maybe did consciously, and anything about me having a self-belief. But, you know, that was the start, I guess. So I guess really sort of fast track towards, you know, transition years. I used to work for a disability charity Scope, and sometimes the buzzwords still slip out, but it's the transition year, obviously, is adolescence, and, you know, there's a lot of hormones going on, and there's a lot of worries about what you're going to do when you grow up, and it would be very easy for a disabled person to assume that, you know, you can't work, or you can't have a social life, you can't have relationships, and I think because of that positive footing I started on, I was, you know, able to just progress through that and go through the ups and downs that anyone else was. But again, it was all very normal. I suppose the big kind of moment where things got trickier and I then probably had to start to take a lead was university. So I went through school, I had a good group of friends, had, you know, nice times out, and it got to 18 years old, I'd done my A-levels. The next step was obviously go to university. So while all my friends were gearing up for that, and I knew personally what courses I'd want to do, I wanted to do economics. There was the thing about the living conditions. So say my other friends would have just picked where they went and gone off, and that would have been it. They'd have been a bit nervous, but they'd have kind of got through it. But for me, having had my mum and dad do all of the care that I sort of explained earlier, suddenly I was either, well, do I stay at home, go to a local university, but then surely I'm missing out on the hedonism that we all would imagine would be the case, and I'm going to assure you that was true in the long run. But there was a lot of things to sort out in the meantime. So in the end, I actually went to Coventry University, and the main reason I went to Coventry was they had a specialist unit. So there were staff that had looked after many other disabled people and got them integrated in the uni before they set up a big care scheme. So I was in a block of, there was maybe 40 blocks of living quarters, but the one block that I was in was accessible, bigger kitchen, you know, hoist, that kind of stuff. And then this care scheme that sort of existed around that. So whilst I maybe wouldn't have chosen Coventry in the first sense, it, you know, it was a needs must, and it was I suppose something I probably learned more and more is that if you don't have those foundations, and this is, you know, people can relate to this even if you're not disabled, if you've not got the sort of basic foundations of your life, whatever that is, in order, it's hard to then grow, develop and progress in other ways. So once I kind of got there, you know, there was access and there was care and everything, you know, cracked on with it. But as you can imagine, turning up 18 years old, you're an hour and a bit away from home, which is the first time you've really been away from home. And suddenly these four strangers come in and they're, you know, we're your carers and we're going to now look after you for the next year. And mum and dad leave and they're like, you know, what do we do in terms of the shower stuff? It's quite a challenging one to, you know, have that personal care from someone you've never met in your life. But I suppose equally, again, that was the making of me, because the fact I learned to overcome that very difficult step, I've been able to move on, and through having that care and having that, probably that experience that, a bit like Anne said, it, you know, it didn't fail, it actually went well, but, you know, it didn't kill me, so it made me stronger. That was definitely a crucial moment. So during that time, I broadened my horizons, met a lot of people from all different cultures and around the world, and ended up, you know, lifelong friends that I've been able to go and visit since. And I got my degree in economics, I got a 2-1, and then I decided, to be honest, because actually I wanted to stay on uni another year, I might as well do a master's. It was a little bit more leaning towards the good times, but equally I got my master's as well, which was in marketing. So all of this stage was very much about me, and in a fair sense, in the sense that I was getting my education, getting things set up, and sort of getting ready to go out into the big world, I suppose. So once I graduated, I moved back to St Ives, as Anne said, where I had grown up. And that, again, was difficult, actually, coming back home. I mean, again, you hear people have been to university and then going back with the parents. It's always can have a little bit of friction after you've had all that freedom. But in many ways, the difficulty was more that living back home couldn't facilitate the carers because there wasn't a spare room, and it meant there wasn't the facilities for someone to live in 24 hours. So I went back to having mum and dad do the care a bit and having some agencies come in, and then, I was probably missing the uni life, but finding it harder that I couldn't live on my terms again. It was a bit more having to fit in with mum and dad and everything. So I got my first job, which was at the disability charity Scope. Now, obviously I'm going to move on to work in a moment in terms of what I do now, but the e-course I've been doing at the moment around employment, there's a big thing that a lot of disabled people end up working in disability-related roles, and I was absolutely adamant I wouldn't. And as you can probably tell, I don't like to be pigeonholed. I like to get out and live, as I keep putting inverted commas, a normal life. And I felt that if I was almost to work something around disability, I would be almost limiting myself, or that other people might sort of assume that, he's in a chair, that makes sense, he's working at a disability charity kind of thing. But on the other hand, there's that kind of practicality that a disability charity would understand the additional needs I had. And so I sort of figured, well, obviously I'm for the cause, I'm absolutely for the cause, but it would be a good test of work experience and, starting in a big organisation and seeing where it took me. And I never really looked back. About a year after I'd done basic admin and, learning about offices and office politics and, all the things that are important in the real world, I then was sort of ready to move out of mum and dad's again. But I had this lifelong dream of London, and sort of similar to the uni, it's another transition. In many ways it makes sense. I wanted to go to the capital, further my career, have the buzz of London in my 20s and, see what happened after that. But you wouldn't believe the difficulties of finding an accessible place, but that's affordable in London especially. I think other parts of the country, the buildings might be a bit newer, sort of new build initiatives, but a lot of London is sort of older buildings, so the access was appalling. So having got a new job and knowing I could move to London in terms of I had a role, I had the financial independence from the role as well, it was all about getting kind of set up again with my needs. So I think it took 2 months to find the accessible flat. In the meantime, I was commuting from St Ives to London, which was horrific. I mean, summertime, I'm pretty energetic despite having my disability, but I'd say winters affect me quite a lot, the cold, and if I get a cold, I have to be very careful of chest infections and that kind of stuff. And this was in October and November, so again, this was back to that kind of self-belief, I guess, of I can do it, but a resilience that, if I get through it, it will be worth it as well. And that's probably what fueled me to stick with it. So once I got the flat, I essentially was leaving St Ives in terms of social services. So I've talked about my social care budget, or the care I had anyway, is underpinned by a social care budget. And I think mine is worth around £40,000. So I'm employing people full-time to be able to support me. So, 40 grand probably does stack up, and obviously we all know it's a lot of money, and we'll move into the sort of investing in disabled people when I come back to my job. But once I said I was leaving St Ives, I then had to ask Hackney Council, where I'd moved to pick up the tab, so to speak. Now, this is before the issues we're talking about now. This was 4 years ago. Now, I actually would worry, and I don't know if I actually could make the move, because councils are struggling with the social budgets. But luckily, after about 6 months of fighting, and fortunately I had kind of an overspend of the care money in Cambridge, So I employed my support workers, I paid them with the overspend, and then once Hackney agreed and signed everything off, they backdated the money, and essentially, I managed to get through. But you can see that for a guy wanting to just move to London for a job, I'm dealing with HR, I'm dealing with finance, I'm dealing with, access issues. It's a lot of different things that you wouldn't imagine as a general person you'd have to deal with. But in a sort of general sense, the way I live life is I rolled, I got through it, and again, I never looked back. So moving into the job at Scope, I spent another 3 and a bit years there, and suddenly, I guess, probably embracing what they did, partly because I'd grown up a bit and realised that my view of not almost identifying with being disabled, I'd come up against the problem and I'd deal with it, but I didn't almost consciously think, oh, I'm disabled. But with the difficulties of all the things I've taught you of uni and moving, and there were some issues, I guess, starting a job with how you can access the desk and all those sort of things. Yeah, I guess you kind of realise there are a lot of barriers, and my disability is a big part of who I am. So that sort of probably changed things a bit. But then, I suppose just getting involved in my work and running projects that you could see were making a difference lit a little bit of a fire. And then I also was on a board for the Jennifer Trust of Spinal Muscular Atrophy, basically the small charity for my disability. And I spent 2 years on the board just helping do the sort of top line stuff. And I ended up doing some talks for teenagers with the same disability. And, it's a pretty obvious thing to say, but if you're faced by a room of people that have the fears that I know I had at, say, 15, 16 years old, and someone, almost irrelevant who they are, but someone with the same disability says it's doable, the details are almost irrelevant, but the fact that it's possible, you'll work it out yourself. And that really was probably what spurred me on to do what I've ended up doing. So on the side of the job, because I think I was probably feeling a bit stifled in a big organisation, I'm quite ambitious, and I wasn't maybe, CEO quick enough of a £100 million charity with 3,500 people, just wasn't happening quick enough. I suppose my health was a consideration as well, probably, not getting any younger, and the winters are getting harder, and sounding like an old git now, aren't I? But I think I started to value, I knew more what I wanted to do work-wise generally. I knew I needed a better work-life balance, and an ability to be a bit more flexible and run my own thing, but have my own sort of manage my health as well. So in a way, all these things started to converge. But just sort of prior to, I took the plunge that sent my dad on the roof, as you'd imagine, aka quitting the day job. I sort of started a blog off the back of doing the talks, and I think some of you may have seen the blog off the back of Anne's promotional stuff as well. But the idea of the blog was to deliver the message of a talk, the way I just said, to the younger, disabled children, but partly to deliver that, not just to be in a room, but obviously over the internet you can reach more people. But then also I realised that non-disabled people had never even considered some of the things that I come up against. And I used to almost probably hide that from them because I didn't want to sort of appear like it's an issue or too different. And you sort of realise that for people to understand the difficulties faced with being disabled, that's the key to removing all the barriers I've talked about, because when everyday people understand that a ramp to get in a building is going to enable, even on a business case, you're going to have potentially a whole new customer base of people coming into your shop. And there's obviously the social cause and there's a legal cause, but there's a lot of different arguments of how non-disabled people could and should understand this whole area. But it definitely is more about connecting with other disabled people, and then sing the praises high enough. But Twitter absolutely opened the world up. I was blogging for a couple of months, and I think my mum logged on if I'd not rung for a week and wondered what I was doing in London, kind of thing. And then gradually it's expanded and expanded. This was through assistance of some people in America who they're called Misfit Inc. I have no real tech background. I'm definitely more sort of business, marketing, and that side of things. But Misfit Inc. helped to sort of get my website up and running, the design, how to kind of the social media strategy side, I guess, as well. And it was definitely not a business venture. It was just a hobby and a social thing. But I guess in the 2 years that I've been blogging, you know, the community grew, and I was keen to launch new projects within that community. And essentially, if you're going to do that full time, you know, you need to keep it sustainable. So then my business had kicked in, and yeah, it all kind of started coming together. So to sort of move it, really, the last part of the story in a way is end of June last year, I left Scope, and it was on good terms. So I still, you know, Scope are a big disability charity, and they're able to still help me promote what I'm doing. But I've sort of carved out quite a niche on two sides, because one is a lot of the disability charities are sort of talking about society reducing the barriers, as I was saying, like non-disabled people, and they do kind of projects with disabled people, but it's not almost from disabled people, if that makes sense. It's a bit convoluted, but the benefit of me doing it is that I have lived it and I've been through it, and therefore my point is, you know, it's a lived experience. But also, if I'm honest, got a little bit of a free rein to sometimes say, snap out of it. You know, there is a lot of crap going on and it is difficult, but actually, you know, with the right way of thinking and a little bit of positivity, you can actually get where you want to go. And I think that's something that the charities maybe find it harder to say. You can also lean towards the sort of patronising side of how some of the communications can come across. So there's definitely a niche there, and the other niche is online. So the business that I've kind of, a social business that I've launched is I run a disability magazine, which is www.disabilityhorizons.com. Adelina here has written for us, and the article went down extremely well. And the idea of the magazine is that, having done my blog and I talk about what I get up to, there's a lot of other disabled people online that kind of wanted to share things they've done without running a website or making it a constant thing. So we have writers, contributors from over 60 countries now, or just sometimes only, you know, a person will write just once and that's it, and other people come and write regularly. And I think that's going to really become quite a big resource for disabled people, because whilst there's the inspiring stories of, you know, I travelled to Thailand, or I have managed to work, or I've done all these different things that we've covered. Yeah, I think probably there's going to be other resources that, once the community grows and, you know, we get more resources and funding behind it, we're going to be able to give helpful websites and other sort of projects that can all be, I guess, in the end, a portal for disabled people. So whether you're working or you're travelling, but very much lifestyle based, the resources are there. Another thing that I've ended up doing is running webinars. So has anyone been on a webinar or know what a webinar is? A couple of nods. Because the marketing of a webinar is so hard, because a lot of people just are turned off by the name. So that's been the biggest barrier to overcome there. But the way that works is that for 1 hour, I'm using the technology to deliver a seminar into people's living rooms, basically. And again, if you think of the barriers that disabled people have to not have to travel and to not have to spend any money to access information that is going to help you on a job search, or to travel the world, or to just get out a bit more once a month and try and get a hobby, or, you know, the point is it can be as aspirational as that person wants, but all of the information is on these resources. So it started a bit kind of me talking about what I've been up to, and then I've this year been able to push it forward and have guest speakers. So the end of this month I've got one on relationships, which obviously is another, you know, key area for disabled people. There's a lot of attitudinal barriers with relationships, but at the end of the day, you know, as a lot of people can say, they have a disability and they are in good relationships. So the speakers are, as an academic who has done a PhD on the whole topic, and there's someone else who's a relationship counsellor. So it's not just disabled people. I'm starting to bring in relevant professionals and, I guess, join the dots, really. You know, and so the last part of the puzzle is the e-courses. And Philip behind the camera there and I have been working very, very hard to launch my e-courses at the end of this month. So it's really taking an online learning format to the next level. So a person will log in to my employment e-course. They will have a weekly email which is automated, which I've pre-written, that sort of guides them through the course. And I've then, via Skype, interviewed 10 contributors, one in Canada, one in Sydney, and obviously quite a few in the UK, all who have a disability and all who give really, really helpful and inspiring information on, as I keep saying lately, kicking ass with a disability. I'm not sure if this catchphrase is going to become illegal, but you know, I'm rolling with it for now anyway. So, but again, I think that comes back to I have a freer reign to say how it is really, and I think that resonates with people. So the three core projects I'm doing are the magazine, the webinars, and the e-courses. I've managed to get all the technology ready and fired up. The content is obviously flowing out of me with my experience, but the sort of community that I've built up through Twitter, they're all full of helpful ideas and things that add value as well. The marketing channels are there with social media and with the charities I work with and the councils and all of that world. So I've done sort of consultancy to keep the bills paid with some councils and charities and keep things ticking, but the longer run is that we'll have advertising with the magazine, which we've already got Nokia Access on board, which was quite a nice one to have. And obviously there's a potential of many disability brands that can reach out to disabled people, whether it's selling wheelchairs and things like that. And then so the final bit of the next 6 months that I'm working on is to bring the funding in and the income in to keep all of this sort of long-term stable and sustainable. And then really the future's as big as it wants to be, but there's a lot of other sort of different projects I hope to launch. And then I suppose bringing it back to the personal and the fact that I'm now feeling happier and healthier, that I'm not struggling in the office with the 9 to 5 and I'm working more hours than I've ever worked, but on my terms, which makes a difference, I think. But I have a big passion for travel, and I've not sort of touched upon that too much, but I think it's probably easy to assume there's a few barriers with getting on airplanes with a wheelchair and finding accessible accommodation. And for me, the big first one that sort of led on to me travelling all over the world was Australia, and I did that at uni, and that was a trip of a lifetime. And I still remember the goosebumps as I rolled up to Sydney Harbour, having planned it for 6 months and saved up for years, and it all went according to plan. And I would say I've carried on travelling ever since. And for March and April, I'm going to be on a volunteering project, which is in Spain. And the activities that I'll be doing for the European Voluntary Service are kind of helping promote the project, learning some Spanish, teaching English. But they also want, because they know what I do, to bring me in. It's the northwest of Spain, which ironically I chose Spain because of the sunshine. Apparently the weather is bloody awful now. Yes, but you win some, you lose some. So I'll be rolling out sort of some talks and workshops to the local councils and businesses, and in a way that could lead to some other opportunities in the northwest of Spain. But I'll still be blogging, running the mag, doing the webinars, because it's all online. I can still do it remotely. And if you're a disabled person, following all of this, me being in Spain for 2 months is pretty cool. So it still adds into the whole purpose. So it all kind of, I guess, all came together in the end. So, I mean, that probably wraps up the stuff I wanted to share on a personal level. And I hope, that there's sort of things that have been of interest and entertaining, and certainly you can see how self-belief would draw into this. But I thought it would be interesting, to kind of put it onto you guys and break off a little bit and have a bit of a chat in smaller groups about, I guess, when you have had success and achievements for yourself, and then kind of thinking about when and if and how self-belief was a part of that. And then maybe once we've had a bit of a chat and identified some of the areas of times where you've had self-belief, we can then explore some of the factors of whether you were conscious of that or whether it was sort of natural, and if there's ways of harnessing it even if you hadn't realised it can be a powerful tool. And also, as we mentioned on the outcomes, I think some strategies, because I remember there's a few times where I've been unwell or I've been feeling like things are too much, and I'm almost ready to give up with Hackney Council social care, or ready to give up on planning the travel to Australia. And you know, that there were definitely people around me that reminded me of my self-belief. And I think that comes back to, for me, my family and friends have always been the reason that even when the self-belief wasn't there or it wavered, they instill it back in me. So I think when we look at strategies, it's partly about understanding within, but it's also about, you know, finding ways of being around other people that can give you that self-belief as well. I think it's a balance. So do you want to kind of talk within your rows, but feel free to move the chairs so you can kind of face each other. But if you kind of stick within the sort of 4 or so at a go in the rows that you're in, yeah?